So now it is time to start a new tool, the analysis tool, and we're going to cover the first three in here, the inspector, units and dimensions, and then also the measuring tool, just to give you, more abilities. These are not, well, I guess some of them will change some things. You'll see what I mean. All right, so the inspector tool is going to be mostly the tool you're going to think of as the hole closing tool. Okay, there are some things that I want to make you aware of. I've made a couple holes on here. Okay, so if you notice right here, this one's just a normal looking hole. These are two holes side by side with a very small gap in between. And I think, we'll try this out, I think that if we did a similar one and left a little bridge like that in between, we'll get the same result, but don't quote me on that. And then notice on this one, we've got this little island, and I also am gonna just kind of make a messy spot, okay, like this, and delete that. All right, I believe you're gonna see a similar thing between those two, okay? So let's go ahead and run the inspector and let's see what we get. All right, so let's go back into the analysis tool and then we run the inspector. So yeah, as I was expecting, we were going to get the regular hole to be a blue, okay? The red one, you can see that when there's this small bridge in between, it typically will outline it in red. Then you have this magenta, and then this one also is in magenta. So the way I understand these colors is that the blue is going to be your most predictable, where it's just going to close the hole. The red is going to close the hole, but it's first going to delete the triangles that are red, okay? And then the magenta is just going to delete them and not fill a hole, okay? So let's go ahead and look at some of these. So let's do the easy ones. So there's this blue one, closes the hole, okay? The other thing I want to mention is the hole fill type. So the flat fill is going to fill it flat, just like it did down here. When I'm on a curve like this, I can fill it flat, but I can also switch it to smooth fill. And these are just like the options that we looked at when we were in the erase and fill tool. Minimal fill, we'll do these in a different variety. Let's do this. Let's first click on one of these red ones and one of the magenta ones. So notice when I click on this, it's going to delete all of these ones that are red, and it's going to leave a hole, or it's going to fill it in behind, just like it would if it were blue, but it deletes first, whereas in the blue one, it doesn't delete any of these outer rings, it just fills in the hole. So let me go ahead, stare at it closely, look at the ones I said it's going to delete, the ones that are highlighted in red, and notice that they did delete and that they're gone, okay? And then notice right here, if I click on that magenta one, I don't know why these are still red right here. Let's see if they're still red if we go back into the tool. Nope. So when I clicked on the magenta one, they just deleted, okay? Right here, I want to show you the difference between a flat fill, which is this one down here. So notice that the triangles down here are remeshed, like in the erase and fill. It was like a remeshed fill. That's what this one is. If you go to a minimal fill and you click on it, see how it closes the hole, but it does it with as few as triangles as possible. And then on this one, we can say a smooth fill because it's kind of on a curve. But notice right here, it didn't fill it in flat. And you would notice that more if it was something on a more notable curve. So like, for example, when we are trying to change a screw axis hole on something designed in ExoCAD, and we're working on the surface of a tooth and we're deleting the old screw axis hole, we'll use a smooth fill in an area like that because we want it to try and follow the contours of the tooth, okay? All right, I'm going to go back to the flat fill because that's the default. And on this one, remember that it's going to want to fill, or it's going to want to erase all of these and then fill it in. Sometimes I've noticed that it does this because the bridge in between is something that the software does not handle well. And sometimes, I'm going to hit done, sometimes, I don't know if this is going to work well on camera, but sometimes if you go to the bridge in between, and either one, you can go in with a smooth tool and try to smooth it into a broader band. I'm going to try to come in with a remesh and get smaller triangles, and then now that we have smaller triangles and the software has something more to work with, let's see, nah, it's still causing a problem. Let's try it again. Okay, just curiosity has the better of me right now. And then analysis and then inspector. So see how once we gave it enough triangles in between to do what it needs to do. I don't know the exact calculations that it's going through to fill these holes, but obviously it was not happy with not having enough triangles in between. So now we can go in and do that, and then at the end you could always go back in under sculpting and mess around with the actual triangle sizes to get something that's back to normal. Okay, and so that gives us that. All right. The keyboard shortcut for the inspector tool is I. So if no other tools are selected and you hit I, it brings the inspector on. Notice right here, it's going to click on that and it leaves a hole. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention, I want to delete a couple of these holes again. Okay. When you go into escape, now when you go into this tool, there's also this small threshold one. And I don't know if these are going to be enough, but so the small threshold is basically giving the software a limit as to how small is okay. And right now it's set at 0.01 millimeters. If you drag it all the way down, see how now it's saying that it's going to just delete these and fill them in. Okay. I don't know. I've never tried dragging it all the way up. I don't play around much with this, to be honest. The default on this one is just 0.01, but that's what it's for. The other thing we didn't talk about is right here, this auto repair all. When you click on that, it fills everything in. Notice that on this one, it did fill it in. Okay, whereas if you do it this way, I can click here, I can click here, and I can click here, but this just deletes it, and I'd have to run the tool again to then go in and close it. But when I said auto repair all, it just fixed it all the way to completion instead of going in 2 steps. So that's something I wanted to just explain to you. You'll use that tool a lot, especially as you bring an intraoral scan in and you're trying to clean it up. Normally what I do is a combination of bridging, inspector, and smoothing to clean up the borders or something. Every now and then you might utilize something else. But those are the main things. And we'll talk more about that later in the course, about cleaning up a scan. So I'm going to go ahead and hit done. For the unit and dimensions one, if you click on that, what that does is it creates a box around the object. Notice that this, I think they call it a bounding box. Notice the bounding box is on the XYZ grid. So that's how it's positioned. So if you were to move your rabbit, okay, so like for example, let's go out of here, hit T on the keyboard, and I change it like this, and I hit accept, and I do units and measurements. Notice that it still keeps this on the grid, and it gives you some measurements. Okay, so height-wise of this rabbit is 50 millimeters. You see, millimeters. If I want, let's say you bring something in and you want to scale it to a different size, but let's say you don't want it in millimeters, you want it in inches. Okay, right here it says, would you like to keep the XYZ the same or convert to the new unit? We'll say convert to the new unit, because now we can see that what used to be 50 millimeter tall rabbit is now almost a 2-inch tall rabbit. Okay, and so if I know that I want that rabbit to be 5 inches tall, I can click that into here and it resizes it. Okay, so now my rabbit is 5 inches tall. If I want to print this right now, I'd be able to print it at 5 inches. let's see, grid size, I notice, is just something that's telling you what this right here is, okay? And in this case, I'm wondering if when it's at 1, it's just a default, because if I notice what happens is if I go in and I put it at 10, I don't do this a lot, to be honest. Hold on. I've done it more in the millimeters. All right, let's switch over to millimeters. Millimeters, convert. So when I'm in millimeters and I put my grid at 10, notice that and let's change this to something that's a little smaller. Let's go to 5 millimeters. All right, so this, and it switched my grid to 1. So you see this from here to here is 1. And so if you look, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, like this outer one right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little more than 5. Okay, so that gives you an idea on what the grid size can do. If I switch that to 5, it looks like the outer grid, like way out here, this is 5, and then it breaks it into smaller increments. I don't really mess around much with that, but if you ever wanted to change your grid size, so that's a way that you can, one, change the entire size of your object, like scale it to a specific size. You can do that in scale, like in the transform tool as well. But you can change your grid size. But then this is the interesting one right here, okay? And for this one, I'm actually gonna, like the example I saw, which I don't have an example to show you for, somebody had taken a scan of a real object. It was actually like the front of a doorway going inside a building. And they scanned it in and they brought it into here, but they had actual measurements that they took when they were scanning that in. And what I'm going to do instead is show you this object right here, which is kind of hard to see. And so let me do this. Let me go into edit and get some face groups here just so we can see things a little better. All right. So then go back into the analysis, into this tool. Now notice, let's say that this is a cell that my son designed for his school project. And he designed it in Fusion 360. But let's say he got this out, and we already looked at changing things by these right here, these. But let's say he knew, or let's say there was a requirement for his assignment that the center of the cell had to be a certain dimension. You can click in one spot here, drag to another, and it creates this line. And then you can come in, that's the real length, but let's say that he was supposed to make that 15, okay? So he can switch this to 15 and it resizes. See now the real length is now 15. But let's say you had certain dimensions throughout, okay? And so you came over here and then you clicked on this one, and this one was supposed to be 8.5. And the more you do this, and this is not the best application for this, okay? Doing something in real life and bringing in the real measurements makes a lot more sense to me. But if I start going along, notice that when I'm going through and changing this, I don't know why this one's not hitting enter, but notice that as I have been adding more and more dimensions, it's telling me how far off I am from being able to make these all the same. And one of these, so notice that, you know, the first one I changed it to 15, but then it deviated away from that, okay? So it's trying to find like a close enough deviation to size it properly. So it makes more sense if you're trying to scale something on the computer to something in the real world. So like if you scanned it with something that didn't maintain the dimensional accuracy, that would be a way of doing that. All right. So I'm going to go back to our other scene. and I'm going to show you this last tool, which is the measure tool. Okay, and let's see here. So the measure tool allows you to choose a few different ways of measuring. Okay, so this is telling you, like these top ones right here, you click on one spot and then it will measure to a different spot. This one here, you click on two spots and it'll measure between those two spots. And then this one right here, you click on one spot, it gives you the XYZ, and this one, it tries to create a cylinder around something and then gives you the radius. The direction shows when you're using these top ones, where you're just clicking in one spot and then it goes in a direction, that's this. And then the snapping modes, this one I'll show you when I get to this one right here, but this allows you to snap to something, okay? Which is similar to some of the things we saw when we were in the pivot tool, the drop or make pivot tool. All right, so this one right here, and I have some pre-selected areas right here, you can see. But like for example, if I click on this triangle right here, notice that it's going off of the normal. So that line right there is perpendicular to that triangle, and as you see in the image here, it's measuring from my point through the object until it hits something on the other side. Okay, so that's the idea, is it started at my point and it stopped right here, and this now is telling me what the thickness is in that spot. Notice there's a number above and below, and notice right now they're the exact same. Well, let's say that I, instead of just clicking one time, I click and I start dragging around. Okay, so I'm dragging all throughout this, and let's end like right here. So now this number is the one where I ended. Okay, this number is the thickest spot along the way, and this number right here is the thinnest spot. From all the areas that I was just dragging, it tells me the where I ended, and then the thickest, and then the thinnest. So if you want to measure a whole entire area and get a range for how thick it is, that's what you would do. This one here, notice now, look at the picture, it's going to start where my click is, and it's going the opposite direction. So it's going to go outside the object until it hits something on the other side. So I can go ahead and click right here and see how it goes across until it hits here. Now if I'm out here and I click on it, notice that nothing happens because there's nothing that it's going to run into. So if you clicked here, you'd notice that eventually the further out you got, you're going to start not hitting. See how it keeps moving out, out, out. And sometimes the angle of these is such that it's just not going to, see it's going now none of these are going. So it's measuring across that void. And then if you go to this one here, notice that this one starts at an edge, goes inward, but keeps going until it hits the outer edge on the far side. Okay, so if I click on this one again, see how it is, that's not what I meant to do. This one's going this way and then it doesn't hit. This one though goes all the way down through the rabbit, all the way down to here. So it starts, you can see right here, starts in one spot and goes all the way until it hits down in here. And then this one does the opposite. If you remember on this one, we clicked here and it stopped right there. Well, if we wanted to measure all the way through to the other side, then we can click this one, and now it's measuring through to the other side. And all of these are the same thing where you can click and you can drag, but notice that, you know, you got to make sure it's within something. And so that's those ones across the top. Okay, and then the direction is, we've been on the normal, which is perpendicular to the triangle. Okay, but if you want to know like in a different direction, so I'm going to go to this and I'm going to click right here, and notice that this one, like I'm going to do one that's on a curve. So if it was the normal, this would shoot down through this way because this triangle is angled. But see how it's going straight down? And so if my object, in this point it's my bunny rabbit, if my object is sitting on the plane, then the Y is going to tell me from that point down to the bottom how tall is the object. Whereas if I were to go with the X direction, notice how it goes it doesn't matter where I click. Here, let me switch my bunny so that we're in the right plane. So notice it's going straight through until it hits it, but it stays along that X axis, and it's going to give you a similar thing if you switch to the Z axis. Okay, so if you want to measure something and it's aligned well to the grid, that's a nice option that you have. So then we've got these ones down here. I'll end with this one. This one's interesting because you click and you just kind of drag around, and notice that as I'm dragging around, it's fitting this cylinder as best as it can onto a shape. And what this is giving me is then a radius of that cylinder. Now, when I was researching this, it was suggesting instead of this tool, it would be a more accurate measurement if you took this, or if you took your fit primitive tool and fit a cylinder that, and then measured the cylinder. And so I don't see myself using this tool very much at all, but it did give you a way of being able to, like, if there's a hole and you want to measure the radius of that hole, you could go in and do something like this. This one here is pretty straightforward, that wherever you click, it gives you an X, Y, and a Z coordinate for that. And so it's, you know, that's what that one does. And then this one, I think, seems to me is the most useful tool, because I can click two different points. Oh, sorry. You left click the first point and then hold down shift and left click to get to the second point. Okay. So if you have 2 points that you want to measure between, then you just, it's always going to be, you know, and notice the one that I left click. So I'm going to left click right here, and then I'm going to left click here. Notice that now the one that I left click stays in place, whereas if I left click here and then I hold down shift, see how this one stays. So they kind of get anchored off of, was it the left click or was it the shift left click? And then I want to show you the snapping modes. And there's not a lot to choose from, but if you do a snap to a vertices, then you can click right here and see how even though I'm clicking anywhere around here, it's snapping to one of the vertices. And then I can hold down shift and click over here and it does the same. Okay. You can also snap to an edge. Now with the edges, you just have to be close to an edge and see how it'll snap along that edge. And then this one stayed snapped to the vertices, but you can do it to an edge. And then you can also snap to a group border. Okay. And so, like, for example, this is a group border. Okay. The other thing that it pointed out when I was researching this a little bit deeper is that it can also snap to pivots. So if instead we were in our edit and we went into the create pivot, we can do something like this where we can say, you know, notice how many options there are for placing a pivot. It already had this one and this one and this one, but let's say that we wanted to snap to the boundary center, click on it, okay. Drop the pivot, and I'm guessing that pivot's sitting right in the center. Let's do this. I want to get rid of this bunny. I want to see an open bunny. So I want to see inside there. And then let's go back over to the create pivot and snap to, oh, not boundary center, sorry. I meant bounding box. All right, so that puts it right in the center, and we're going to drop the pivot. Boundary center needed a boundary, and the other one we had did not have a boundary. So that gives us one that's right there in the center. And then let's also do one that is, let's do a midpoint along a ray. So if you remember from before, what that is if I click right here and I'm viewing like a ray that's going perpendicular to my screen, if I click on this, it's going to go right through to the other side of the bunny, but it's going to take the midpoint. So this is a midpoint between my, oh, did I double click on that one? All right, we'll just use that first one I did. All right, so we hit done. So we've got these 2 points that we wouldn't have been able to use the measurement tool on and then we can come back into analysis, back into measure, and we have our 2 points, and I don't even know if you need, you don't even have to have snapping on. It'll automatically snap to those points, and it gives us a distance between those 2 points. So if you know where you want to measure between, if you just know that between this point and this point you need to make a measurement, that's going to give you an option to make a very precise measurement between 2 different spots. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some answers to some questions you may have had about these different tools. And then next time we'll just kind of keep going down through this list. So thanks for joining me today.